A single flame flickers in the endless dark, as though truth itself whispered softly that existence is hollow behind every laugh. The opening breath arrives quiet, piercing. You wake to realize the world you embraced was built on sand, every promise a fading echo. In that stillness, the mind finally silences itself. The pain of living is not madness, but clarity. Every breath carries the weight of loss. We chase love, meaning purpose phantoms woven by the will. Yet each pursuit resists our touch, slipping forever into tomorrow's emptiness. Modernity offers distractions, screens filled with motion, voices, chanting satisfaction, but beneath the surface is the slow ache of dissatisfaction evergreen. In the glare of neon, awareness weeps. You sense suffering not as punishment, but revelation. Beneath the skin of your self-deception, the raw nerve of reality pulses. The body decays, thoughts tremble, desire surges and dissolves. Every attachment breeds its own demise, and so you stand at the edge of your illusions, feeling their weight slip away, but also the warmth they once feigned. There is a release in seeing. Illusion fatigues and falls away. You taste that release between each inhalation and exhalation, that fragile moment of calm when world and self fade. It is not joy, it is not optimism, but a relief. The unvarnished truth at last unguarded. In that space, you see the machinery of will grinding futilely, spinning stories to distract you from this infinite quiet. The voice of society promises comfort, promise, self-improvement. Yet those words are lullabies, anesthetics for the ache that must be faced. The soul in crisis does not need a plan, it needs acknowledgement. And so your trembling awareness turns inward, all the noise recedes. In solitude, suffering becomes text to be read, not to be avoided. It becomes the chrysalis of clarity. You know, hope is a subtle trap. It glints and fades. Surrender is sharper, quieter. When desire ceases its insistence, the heartbeat sobs less. Without craving, the self unravels. And what remains is clarity, cold as winter, wide as sky. Every culture dresses this nakedness in story, myth, religion, repairs the crack in the vessel, but story only defers suffering, it does not illuminate it. What remains when myth dissolves? Only the raw mirror, the ground of being, patient, indifferent. You face it without resentment, only with awe at your own cynicism. The mind wants less, the soul trembles. You taste that trembling as the true heart of existence. It is not movement but stillness, not becoming but being. You understand suffering not as wrongness, but medicine. It reveals nothing lasts. Form is illusion. Being alone is reality. And in that, knowing there is no triumph, only a gentle dissolving. You do not rise, you do not conquer. You simply cease resisting. The pain does not end, but the resistance to pain dies. In that death, something whispers, I am free of the will's command. You stand in the quiet where illusions once lived. Words lose their seductive power, light dims, the world exists but does not beckon. You sit with the deep emptiness, seeing it for what it is, not terror, not salvation, but rest. Perhaps there is no return, perhaps the self crumbles into compassionate void, but there is no doctrine to embrace, no promise to clutch, only this moment, clear, unadorned, unescaping. Suffering is not an accident, but the axis upon which the wheel of existence turns. It is not the exception, but the ground beneath every joy, the cost beneath every smile. In the brief interludes of pleasure, the will is momentarily silenced, but only to rise again, hungry, more cunning, more relentless. The world dresses this suffering in rituals, in ceremonies of laughter, in fleeting victories. But even in triumph, there is trembling, for all gain is fleeting, and every possession hides the seed of loss. The more one grasps, the more one must fear. Children cry not because they are weak, but because they are not yet dulled. The scream of the newborn is not confusion, it is protest. To be born is to be thrown into need, into lack, into time. The will stirs in the infant long before thought arises. It demands warmth, touch, attention. It demands continuation. And so the great machinery begins. An endless chain of hunger wearing the mask of life. No one escapes it. One may numb it, distract from it, even romanticize it, but always it returns, gnawing quietly, even in sleep. The illusion is not merely external, it lives in the very structure of the self. The ego believes it chooses, but it is pulled like a leaf in the current. What you call yourself is merely the point where the will knots itself into a tension of desires, fears, memories. You are not the author of your longing, you are its captive. You do not chase love, love chases you. You do not choose your suffering, it emerges from the shape of your wanting. The freedom you imagine is only the spaciousness between compulsions. Modernity multiplies illusions, but weakens the soul's capacity to bear them. The ancient tragedies at least honored suffering with dignity, placing it in myth, wrapping it in the music of fate. Now suffering is seen as failure, as a technical problem, a defect to be corrected. But the ache remains, confused and unredeemed. It no longer teaches, it merely disrupts. The loneliness of the modern man is not that he suffers, but that he no longer knows why. In the market of mirrors, the self becomes a product, advertised in pixels, adorned with curated smiles. But behind the images, the hunger remains. Behind the hunger, the void. You scroll not to discover, but to forget the stillness that waits when all noise ends. The screen glows like a false god, promising connection but delivering only a more profound solitude. You can have anything except peace. Desire always wears the face of promise, but it leads only to repetition. The moment of satisfaction is merely a pause before the next ache. What we call happiness is the brief silence between demands. We chase experience, not for its own sake, but to drown the silence that reveals our emptiness. This is the terrible secret. Fulfillment is never in the object, only in the absence of craving. But the will does not rest, it only transforms. And so we wonder. Every relationship, even the most tender, is shaped by this architecture of lack. We seek in the other what we cannot find in ourselves. Love is not union, it is the longing for it. It is not peace, it is the hunger for warmth against the cold truth of solitude. And even when love is given, it cannot fill the abyss. It can soften the ache, briefly. It can delay the hour of reckoning. But in the night, when all words fall silent, the self returns to its solitude, untouched. There is no final answer, no key that unlocks joy forever. The more deeply you look, the more the ground vanishes beneath your feet. Knowledge does not save it, strips. It removes the veil, but leaves you exposed. And yet, in that exposure, a strange clarity arises. Not happiness, but lucidity. Not comfort, but calm. You do not rise above suffering, you become transparent to it. It flows through you like wind through a hollow reed. The wise do not escape pain, they cease identifying with its theater. The body hurts, the mind despairs. But the witness remains silent. In that silence is freedom, not from pain, but from illusion. You do not need to be more, you do not need to become. The fever of wanting quiets. The soul ceases to clamor. In detachment, there is no numbness, only stillness. The storm still rages, but you are no longer the storm. Even time reveals its cruelty. It does not heal, it wears down. It strips away dreams, dissolves faces, dims memory. Each moment is a theft, each tomorrow a deception. We age not into wisdom, but into resignation. The passions fade, not because we master them, but because they betray us. The body decays, the voice weakens, the eyes tire. What remains is the unchanging witness, watching it all drift away like mist at dawn. And still we hope. We hope not because there is reason, but because we are afraid to see clearly. Hope is the narcotic of the soul, the dream that keeps despair at bay. But despair is not to be feared. It is the first truth. Despair is what remains when all distractions fail. It is the stillness beneath the noise, the moment when the will's illusions collapse. In despair, one does not fall, one lands. And in that landing, one sees what cannot be seen while dreaming. The ascetic does not flee the world in hatred, but in truth. He turns from it, not because he despises life, but because he has looked directly at it. He no longer seeks salvation through more pleasure, more success, more love. He has seen their emptiness, their cruelty. He has felt the ache that follows every indulgence, the nausea of endless becoming. So he withdraws not in bitterness, but in still awareness. The world loses its charm, and in that loss he becomes free. But even asceticism is no refuge. There is no position, no role, no identity that can transcend suffering. It is not about escaping, but seeing. The world is not to be fixed, it is to be understood. And in that understanding, the self dissolves. Not into bliss, but into stillness. Not into light, but into the absence of struggle. You do not arrive, you cease wandering. If you listen carefully, you will hear it. The quiet behind every sound, the stillness behind every motion. It is always there, beneath thought, beneath feeling. The essence of being, untouched by story. It has no name, no form. It does not speak, but it absorbs. In moments of deep solitude, when the self finally releases its grip, this presence becomes visible not as light, but as the absence of need. You may call it nothingness, but it is not empty. It is empty of illusion, but full of quiet awareness. It does not offer pleasure, but peace. Not the peace of success or attainment, but the peace of no longer seeking. It is not an answer, but the end of the question. It is not a goal, but the disappearance of the one who strives. And so you sit, you breathe. You do not try to change the world, nor yourself. You simply watch. You see the rise and fall of thought, the birth and death of emotion, the trembling of the will, and you do not interfere. The play continues, but the actor has left the stage. Only the witness remains. This is not redemption, it is not enlightenment. It is simply the end of resistance, the end of becoming, the end of illusion. What remains is not a self improved, but a self dissolved. Not a life fulfilled, but a life released. There, in the stillness beyond the will, the soul finally rests. Not in triumph, but in disappearance. Not in glory, but in quiet. Not in joy, but in the simple absence of striving. This and nothing more. Every life is a burning wick, lit without consent and left to flicker in the wind of time until extinguished by forces indifferent to its warmth. The illusion that we matter, that our suffering carries weight beyond its momentary sting, is the final comfort the world offers and the first to dissolve when one truly begins to see. Even memory, that fragile scaffolding of identity, erodes in silence. Names fade, faces blur. No monument outlasts time's quiet laughter. One believes, in the folly of youth, that effort redeems pain. That by working harder, loving more purely, or thinking more deeply, one can outpace the inevitable decay. But will is not reason, it is hunger without end. It does not understand contentment. It cannot abide stillness. It seeks, not because there is something to find, but because it cannot not seek. And so the world turns, not as a symphony, but as a wheel grinding its own axis into dust. Desire is the great puppeteer. It moves the limbs, shapes the voice, fills the heart with illusions of meaning. It promises that satisfaction is just beyond the next hill, just after the next love, just inside the next prayer. But when the object is attained, desire does not die, it mutates. The hunger that drove the search merely shifts its costume, attaches itself to a new form, and the performance begins again. The man who wins the world merely acquires new prisons. The lover who is loved awakens to the strange loneliness of possession. To see through this is not despair, it is lucidity. A lucidity so sharp it cuts through the veils of hope and reveals not a void, but a strange kind of peace. For in the absence of striving, in the abdication of the will, there arises something quieter than joy. The absence of noise, the still pool where the water no longer stirs. The self does not dissolve in fire, but in silence. This silence is not empty. It is full with the weight of all that has been relinquished. It does not need a god, nor a doctrine, nor a future. It stands on its own, naked and unashamed. Not proud, but unburdened. It is what remains when one no longer fears meaninglessness, because one no longer seeks meaning. The world still spins, but you do not spin with it. You observe, and in that observation, you cease to bleed. How strange that we spend our lives climbing ladders, leaning against crumbling walls, that we barter our peace for moments of applause. our solitude for voices that echo only our fears. Every act of love becomes entangled in the fear of loss. Every triumph is shadowed by the certainty of its undoing. The feast of life is served on the bones of what we used to be, and every bite is seasoned with the knowledge that it will not last. The detachment that follows is not coldness, it is clarity. You do not reject the world, you simply no longer depend on it for completion. You walk among others, speak as they speak, laugh as they laugh, but inside you the fire has stilled. The cravings that once defined you have no more power than smoke. You feel them arise, and you watch them pass. Nothing is gripped, nothing is chased. You do not float above life, you simply no longer drown in it. The ordinary man calls this death. He sees detachment as lifelessness, as a withering of the soul. But the truth is the opposite. It is only when the noise ceases that the soul can truly breathe. Attachment is not vitality, it is addiction. To need is not to live. It is to remain enslaved to the illusion of fulfillment. True life begins only when the needing ends. You do not become a monk, nor a sage, nor a hero. You become a witness, a quiet, almost invisible presence in the play of things. You do not argue with the world's cruelty, nor try to redeem it. You see it, accept it, and walk past. Not above, not below, just past. The birds still sing, the trees still move in the wind, but you no longer interpret them as signs. They are what they are, and that is enough. There is no reward for this clarity. The world does not applaud the man who ceases to chase it. You will be called empty, strange, even broken. But that too passes, like everything else. The need for approval dies when one ceases to identify with the self that craves it. And in that death, there is no bitterness, only release. What then remains? Not happiness, in the way the world defines it. Not excitement, not achievement. What remains is something quieter, something almost imperceptible. A kind of resting. The self no longer pushes, no longer resists. The breath continues, the eyes open and close. The heart beats, but behind all of it, there is no one pulling the strings. Only awareness, spacious and still. You do not rejoice, you do not grieve, you do not sing, you do not pray. These belong to those still in the throes of longing. You simply remain. The days pass like clouds across a winter sky. The sun rises and falls without your needing it. You take what comes, and when it passes, you let it go. Even beauty loses its sharpness. Not because the world is less beautiful, but because beauty no longer wounds you. It no longer awakens the ache of longing. You see a flower and you do not wish to possess it. You see a face and you do not imagine a story. The eye sees without reaching. The heart beats without trembling. This is not nihilism. Nihilism is the scream of a soul that still wants something. It is the protest of a child denied its toy. What remains here is not protest, but surrender. Not rage, but repose. Not a void, but a fullness, too quiet to name. And perhaps this is what they feared. All those who built religions and philosophies and systems of hope. That behind all our stories, there is only this. Not a heaven, not an answer, not even peace as a prize, but this still, undemanding awareness, empty of ambition, immune to despair. It cannot be marketed, it cannot be taught, it cannot be used. It is simply what remains when the dream ends. And so you walk on, not toward anything, not away from anything. You walk because the body walks. You breathe because the body breathes. You neither seek nor flee. You simply observe, and in observing, you vanish. Not into nothing, but into everything. All great pain leads not to transformation, but to silence. The myths we carry of catharsis, of rebirth, of triumphant return are consolations for those who still wish to believe the world gives what it takes. But there are losses that do not resolve, wounds that do not close. There is grief so deep, it becomes the landscape through which the rest of your life moves. You do not overcome such sorrow, you inhabit it. It becomes the quiet measure of your days. There is a dignity in this sorrow that joy can never mimic. For joy expands the self, makes it visible, performs its aliveness. But sorrow withdraws, sheds, dissolves. It strips the self of its ornaments, lays bare the simple fact of being. In this bareness, there is no mask left to wear. The eyes stop pleading, the mouth stops justifying. One simply exists without narrative. And strangely, in that narrative's absence, there arises not despair but a kind of sacred stillness. Even the gods fade in this stillness. They, too, were born from the will's cry, from fear, from longing, from the desperate need to make the suffering mean something. But here, in the shadowless light of truth, meaning itself falls away. Not in bitterness, but in relief. The burden of significance lifted. One no longer needs to make sense of the pain. One simply bears it. Like weather, like wind. To live without story is not to be lost, it is to be finally unburdened. The past does not haunt because it is no longer possessed. The future does not intimidate because it is no longer imagined. There is only this breath, and it asks for nothing. You are not required to be anyone in particular. You are not required to fix what is broken. You are not required to hope. The world outside continues its ritual, noise, consumption, laughter, rehearsed and repeated. But you see the weariness behind the smiles, the panic behind the noise. They still believe they can escape. Their despair still wears the mask of productivity. They believe suffering is failure, and so they rush to remedy it. But you know now, to suffer is not to fail. It is to be awake in a world designed to deceive. Love, once seen through the lens of this awareness, changes. It is no longer salvation. It is no longer promise. It becomes a shared solitude, a silent agreement between two brief flames to warm each other before the wind returns. You do not ask the other to complete you. You do not offer yourself as a solution. You simply sit together in the same cold truth and find, for a moment, that it is enough. There are no heroes in this view. No one overcomes. No one triumphs. Even the enlightened fall ill, grow old, vanish. The sage dies as the fool dies. The difference lies not in the outcome, but in the awareness that precedes it. The sage no longer resists. He does not strive to leave a mark. He does not hope to be remembered. He watches the tide take everything, and in that taking, he sees the strange beauty of transience. To detach is not to escape love, it is to love without grasping. It is to see the other, not as a possession, not as a balm, but as a fellow shadow passing briefly through the same light. You do not say mine, you do not say forever, you say only here, for now, and that is enough, that is all it ever was. The detachment deepens not by force, but by attrition. Each disappointment peels another layer. Each betrayal reveals another illusion, and slowly the self becomes lighter, thinner, less defined. You no longer need to be understood. You no longer need to be vindicated. You no longer need to speak. Silence becomes your native language. There are moments, fleeting and pure, where the veil seems to lift entirely, where the entire edifice of the world is seen as it is, a restless trembling in the void. And in that moment, you do not panic. You do not rejoice, you simply see. You see the futility, the repetition, the hunger beneath every gesture, and you feel no need to intervene. You realize then that nothing can be taken from you, because there is nothing that ever truly belonged to you. All things are borrowed, all moments are brief, all selves are costumes. Even your name is a sound others agreed upon. It holds no substance. Let it go. What remains after all this shedding is not emptiness, it is spaciousness. Not coldness, but freedom. The world still aches, but it no longer wounds you in the same way. You are not armored, you are exposed, and in that exposure you are no longer vulnerable. Pain touches you, but it does not claim you. Fear whispers, but you do not answer. And so you walk quietly among those still dreaming. You do not wake them, you do not preach, you simply listen. And sometimes, when the noise subsides, they too feel it, that tremor of truth beneath the surface. Most will look away, but some, just a few, will meet your gaze and know. And in that knowing, there is no need for words, only the shared silence of those who have ceased to chase. You do not call this peace. That would still be a claim. You do not call it enlightenment. That would still be a title. You call it nothing, because it needs no name. It does not move. It does not grow. It simply is. And in that isness, the will dies. Not with a scream, not with a final battle, but like a candle allowed to burn itself out, gently, naturally, without resistance. The light dims, the flame flickers. And in the quiet after, there is nothing, but there is no longer anyone to mind. And so the last veil falls. Not with thunder, not with revelation, but like the final leaf drifting from a branch that no longer remembers spring. The will, exhausted by its own momentum, ceases its trembling. There is no sound in its collapse, no applause, no mourning, only the stillness of a room when no one returns. What is left is not the self, for the self was always a mask worn by the will to disguise its thirst. Now that thirst is gone, and with it the illusion of identity dissolves like mist under a colorless sun. You are not a person, not a role, not a thought echoing through flesh. You are the silence that remains when all speaking ends. And in this silence there is neither loss nor gain, only the absence of need. All paths have led here, though they appeared to lead elsewhere. Every desire, every disappointment, every heartbreak carved this hollow in the soul where now only quiet abides. It is not peace, for peace is still relational. It is the negation of war. This is not the opposite of suffering. It is the end of opposition altogether, the end of the story of becoming. Even beauty fades, not because it decays, but because it no longer dazzles. Its seduction required the ache of longing. Now the longing is gone, and beauty is seen not as promise, but as presence untouched, unpossessed, a passing shape, a moment of light on stone, and then, as all things, gone. You walk now, not through the world, but beside it. The trees still sway, the sky still burns with evening, the faces pass, still marked by hope and despair. But you do not enter, you do not resist. You do not seek. You are no longer a name among names. You are the gap between them, the breath that does not belong to anyone. No heaven awaits, no final judgment, no eternal reward. These are dreams the will dreamed to soothe its terror. But the terror is gone, because there is no one left to fear. Time passes, but you are no longer within it. Life continues, but not for you. The dream persists, but you have stopped dreaming. This is not oblivion. It is not darkness. It is not rest. It is simply the absence of turmoil, the absence of striving, the absence of self. You have not been cured. You have not been saved. You have not been transformed. You have simply seen, and in seeing, you have ceased to cling. No monument will bear your name. No echo will carry your voice. And yet nothing is lost, for there is nothing left to lose, nothing that needed to remain. The river takes all, and the river remains. In this final, quiet, even thought bows its head. Even memory falls silent. Even sorrow, the last companion, takes its leave. And what stands in its place is not you, but that which neither begins nor ends. You do not awaken. You do not sleep. You vanish. And in that vanishing, all that was restless is still.